Open your Bibles, please, with me to Daniel chapter 8. I mentioned that when Brother Brooks was here that Daniel chapter 7 was hard to outline. And I heard him say, amen. Daniel chapter 8 is not any easier. And so we're working at trying to figure out how to best present the material. Wiersbe, in his book on Daniel, broke it down first in looking at, in chapter 8, at Daniel, the preacher, the prophet. And so I'm going to try to kind of follow that. It looked like it was pretty organized. And so we're going to be in Daniel chapter 8. Remember what's brought us to Daniel chapter 8. Daniel, as a young man, mid-teens, was brought into Babylonian captivity and taken through a 3-year reprogramming system. It was, I mean, they obviously didn't call it that, but that's what it was for, to take these Hebrew kids, young people, and turn them into ambassadors that work for the Babylonian government and can relate to the Hebrew people. Well, Daniel excelled in that. God gave him favor in everybody around him. Well, in the kings and a lot of the leadership around him. If you remember, the other wizards of smart in the cabinet didn't like Daniel too much, tried to get rid of him. But in the main, he served leaders that respected him, and he gave us what it was to be just a model citizen. He didn't try to turn Babylon into a Hebrew nation, but he lived his convictions all the time, every day. And it stood out. And those in authority liked it, and those that were trying to have more authority didn't like it, because Daniel was a threat to them very often. And then Nebuchadnezzar had the dream of the image, and how Daniel was able to tell him that Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold. You're the leader of the Babylonian empire. You're the head of gold in that image. And then it worked its way down, and he was able to describe to Nebuchadnezzar the fact that this image would represent successive kingdoms, and the Medo-Persian Empire to follow the Babylonian Empire, and so on. And then in chapter 7, Daniel had his own vision. He kept saying that. I, Daniel, saw. And this was something that was in somewhat of a contrast to, he wasn't just helping Nebuchadnezzar understand what was going on. I, Daniel, saw. And in Daniel's vision, he had the 4 beasts. And again, I believe it represents the very same thing in Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the image, but more detail. More detail unfolds. And in Daniel chapter 8, we won't get into it tonight, but in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has another vision 2 years later, and again, vivid imagery, and it is again the same lesson, but layer upon layer upon layer, more information, layer upon layer, more revelation. And in this message, we'll focus on Daniel's experience and how that he was overwhelmed by all that he saw and what took place. And this is a good spot to remind you of something we brought out in the introduction, that Daniel's, as a book, is kind of unique, that there's a Hebrew introduction, and then from chapter 2 and verse 4 all the way to the end of chapter 7 is written in Aramaic, the language prevailing that region of that day. And so it was, especially chapter 7, I made this point. The focus of chapter 7 was not the minute details but that God's coming, and the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man is coming in judgment and wisdom, and is going to make it all right, and reset and restore and put it all back. And that was written in Aramaic so that the people in that day of that region especially would understand it, would see what God was doing. Starting in chapter 8, the book is originally written is back in Hebrew again. Now, you can't tell that in any English translation unless there's a footnote that in your translation, and mine doesn't show any footnote of change. But every commentary and every resource completely agree that from Daniel chapter 2, verse 4, to the end of chapter 7 was originally written in Aramaic, the prevailing language of that region of that day. And in chapter 8, it picks back up in Hebrew, because it is to the Hebrew people. The information that will come, God wanted the Hebrew people especially to understand and to see. And so he picks it back up in chapter 8 in Hebrew. We will see, and again, not tonight, because we're going to focus more on Daniel and his reaction. We will see information that is so specific about kingdoms being toppled by kingdoms being toppled by kingdoms as chapter 8 unfolds. We will see information so specific that he's naming countries. God is naming countries that will take over other countries long before it happens in some cases. And what's going to be missing in Daniel chapter 8 is Babylon. Babylon is within a few years of being swallowed up by the Medes and the Persians. We saw that in chapter 5 when we were back in that time frame, when Daniel was interpreting the handwriting on the wall. Remember that? The drunken brawl that was going on by the king while the Medes were outside working their way into the kingdom, and the handwriting on the wall comes, and destruction is imminent, and it was that night. And chapter 7, we pick up, remember, a different theme of the book, and we're now focused on Daniel and Daniel's prophetic work, and the children, and getting information about the children of Israel, and not focused on some of the experiences of Daniel in the Babylonian kingdom and so on. And so we'll see that chapter 8, verse 1 starts out the third year of Belshazzar. And chapter 7 was the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So Babylon's still in existence in chapter 7, chapter 8. You get confused because in chapter 5 the Medes took it over. Well, chapter 7 he starts reviewing and working on his experiences as it relates to prophetic things and how that's all going to relate to the Hebrew people. So don't forget that right now the Hebrew in chapter 7, chapter 8, the Babylonian kingdom is still intact. First year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Third year of Belshazzar, chapter 8, verse 1. Third year of Belshazzar. 2 years after the first vision. Babylon as an empire is about to fall. The one, I think that's the most accurate estimate that I remember, I think was 12 years from now. And so it's right at the very end of the Babylonian time frame when chapter 8 picks up. And so when we get into one empire taking over another, it's not going to mention Babylon because Babylon's nearly out of the picture. So start with me in verse 1, chapter 8. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me. And notice how he emphasizes that. Is that in part a humility on his part? Is that in part just a contrasting vision? So this is something I saw, okay? I saw it. And you can see a witness saying, okay, there's one example where I heard from this person that that's what happened. And there's another example where the witness says, I saw what happened. And Daniel seems to be doing that. I saw. Now, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. I believe at the first is the first vision that he's referencing in what we have as chapter 7. And so he's had 2 years. Daniel's had 2 years to chew on this. Daniel's had 2 years to think on lions and bears and leopards and one beast that's so awful and grotesque he doesn't even have a name for it. Daniel has had a couple of years for this to soak in, for him to ponder on this. Daniel's had a couple of years to ponder on the little horn that started out little but didn't stay that way. It was devouring and blasphemy was in its mouth, and he spoke against God and against the saints of God and wore out the saints of God. And so Daniel's had some time to ponder this, and that built upon Nebuchadnezzar's image, the truths there that were there, and the details that would unfold, and layer upon layer, line upon line. And so Daniel is, I want to start back in, I want to make sure, there's got so much in my notes, I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And what I wanted to bring out at this point was that we have the image, we have Daniel's first vision. He says that what appeared unto me at the first, and then he's going to relate to you another image right now, and that is you might, as you're reading, if you're reading a commentary or some Bible scholar that use the phrase progressive revelation. All they mean by that, and it's something that you and I do all the time. It's something that a parent does all the time. It's something that you have happen maybe in the professional environment all the time. Somebody will give you an overview of a task or a procedure. And once you kind of get the feel of that, he'll say, now, when you're doing this, I want you to take note of this and take this batch of numbers and put them in over here and give you some more detail. And once you get comfortable with that, then they'll say, okay, now when you're doing this, I want you to take these numbers, I want you to put them over there, and then you'll notice that over here is another set of numbers, and you got to compare those, and they have to match, and you layer by layer give them more information so that they can do that function or do that procedure. It's progressive revelation. Just giving them what they can absorb, letting them get comfortable with that, give them a little more. We see this in the way the Lord gave Abraham. Abraham, I'm going to make of you a great nation. And he's married to Sarah, and they don't have children, and Abraham's scratching his head. This is not going well. And then Abraham, I'm going to have you and Sarah. From you and Sarah will come a great nation. And then the Lord comes back kind of on a third pass and says, at this time next year, Sarah will have a child. And it didn't start that way. It was progressively given layer upon layer, line upon line, brick upon brick, until he had the information more fully. That, I believe, is what God is doing with Daniel as it relates to the visions, as it relates to the time of the Gentiles, as it relates to what kingdom. And listen, it's going to be so specific in some cases, naming kingdoms that will take over other kingdoms before it ever happens. For the child of God, we're just thrilled. For the child of God, you go, yeah, of course. That's God. That's how God operates. No surprises. Everything clicking along as He sees fit. For somebody opposed to God, for somebody opposed to the Word of God, that is a passage that you've got to get rid of. Daniel is a book. Daniel as a book is one of the most criticized. Oh, that could never happen. That could never happen. That had to have been written, and this is how they usually try to get around the prophetic nature, especially of chapter 8 and so on, that this kingdom will topple this kingdom, will topple this kingdom. The way they get around it. Daniel didn't write that in the second year of Belshazzar. Daniel didn't write, he said he did. But Daniel didn't write it at all. And they'll place the writing of this way after the fact, so somebody could historically know all the details and then just say, I, Daniel, saw this. And that's how they try to get around it. And your less authoritative commentary people will try to critique Daniel and cast doubt on Daniel. Well, we're really not sure that he could have known all these things. We're really not sure that even God could have seen how that this... No. I mean, but that's how specific it is, and as we'll get into this. So, let's read the first two verses. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. So I'm having another vision 2 years later. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw, that I was at Shushan in the palace. Stop right there. In the spirit, I believe, Daniel was transported 200 miles away. In Daniel's vision, he saw himself in Shushan at the palace. But Daniel is residing 200 miles away in Babylon. And no problem for God. And we see this in the New Testament. We see Paul describe the same kind of experience. And so I believe that Daniel was in the spirit taken to Shushan the palace. Now, what's interesting about that is that Shushan the palace will become the capital of Persia, one of the two collaborating entities that will take over Babylon. The Medo-Persian Empire will take over Babylon, and Shushan becomes the capital of the Persian Empire. So Daniel, for context, Daniel is whisked away to what will soon be the capital city of the ruling entity of that region. You're going to see Daniel fall over, pass out, otherwise be wholly overwhelmed, and you can understand why. Daniel's getting a truckload of information. And he's whisked away to the Shushan palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. And again, we're going to focus on Daniel tonight with me being gone next week. I didn't want to break up the focus on the dream, so I was going to stay on Daniel tonight. And that's a lot of why I'm doing that. Verses 3 through 12, you'll have the vision. And then let's just read it. 3 through 12, you get the vision. I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but the one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I'm struggling not to give comment, but I'm just going to keep reading. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. So this ram became great. Had 2 horns, one was a little higher than the other. Keep that in your mind. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. It was moving so fast it didn't even touch the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing in the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So the ram, who had once dominated almost invincibly, is now being dominated himself. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great. So something is taken over for the ram, and it's called the he-goat. And he was strong, and the horn was broken. The great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given unto him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Verses 13 and 14, Daniel asked a question. The question is asked, and I heard one saint speaking to another saint, said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of the desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And just a little tidbit going forward, jump up with me to verse 20. Verse 19. And he said, Behold, I will make thee to know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest, we're so thankful for these interpretations, we know exactly. The ram which thou sawest, having 2 horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. The ram with the 2 horns, one a little bigger than the other, the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire was the bigger of the 2, as I recall. The rough goat is the king of Greece. The king of Greece. He's already describing who's going to conquer the Medo-Persian Empire, long before it ever happened. And he says who's going to do it? Greece. And we're going to see unfold indications that Alexander the Great is very much is what is in view, is who is in view here. And so this all gets very specific as it relates to kingdoms. And but we want to focus tonight on Daniel. So verse 15, it came to pass when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meeting, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. He had the appearance of a man. I believe in verse 15, this is most likely a pre-incarnate visitation of Christ. So he heard one with the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Uli, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So it would seem as though Gabriel is instructed by this one in verse 15 has the appearance of a man. I believe a pre-incarnate vision of Christ. That he's instructed to make this man to understand the vision. Verse 16. Verse 17, so he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and fell upon my face. And he said unto me, understand, O Son of Man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. This carries out all the way to the time of the end. This will unfold and unfold and unfold all the way out to the end of the Gentiles. We will see as we study this that there will be, and in the concept of layer by layer, progressive revelation, you also have in the Scriptures many times that God will say something will happen. And you see it a lot with David. You see it a lot in his life where there will be an immediate application to the truth that was stated. And then there will be a prophetic application to the truth that is stated. And I think we're going to see that in chapter 8 where there is a near future, in Daniel's case, near future application of some of the destruction and the desolation of the temple and so on. And it will have that near future application, but it will point to and prefigure and picture what will come to pass with the Antichrist and the literal desolation of the temple. And he said, Son of man, listen. Well, what happened? Verse 18, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright. Get the picture of that. Daniel seems to pass out, and Gabriel has to set him back up. You got to listen to me. I've got more to tell you. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. I'm going to show you how Gentile history unfolds. Nebuchadnezzar's first image showed an overview of it. Daniel's first dream and vision gave us more information about it. This will give even more information about it. He's learning little by little. He's teaching little by little, layer upon layer, line upon line. And Daniel is overwhelmed. Can you imagine? Of course he's overwhelmed. I'll make you to know what's happening, and it's all going to go exactly according to my plan. What else could happen with God's plan? It's going to go exactly according to His plan, and He's going to, in chapter 8, chapter 9, going to show more and more detail. Now the last two verses. Verse 26. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Now he's not telling him, in my estimation, he's not telling him to hide it. He's telling him to preserve it. Write it down and put it in a book and preserve it. Keep it. Because it shall be for many days. What I am telling you will cover much time. I don't believe he's telling him to hide it. I believe he's telling him to preserve it. Write it down. Keep it safe. Again, verse 27. I, Daniel, fainted. I, Daniel, fainted and was sick certain days. This was... almost made it. This was overwhelming to Daniel. He fainted, seemingly again. And he was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision. But none understood it. Daniel is consuming this, is digesting this, and Gabriel says, I'm going to make you understand this. I'm going to show you what's happening. I'm going to show you Gentile history unfold. I'm going to show you which kingdom takes that previous kingdom with such detail that it will raise the hair on the back of your head. It'll cause you to be astonished, and it'll cause the naysayers of God to say, no way. But that's how specific this will get. And Daniel was sick certain days, astonished at the vision. But he went back to work, pondered on it some more. But none understood it. This experience was overwhelming to Daniel. Think about all that had taken place and whisked away and in the spirit, and seeing this one tell Gabriel, make him understand. And then seeing future described as it were history. Future that is described with detail, like somebody that has a vantage point of seeing it already take place, which is exactly God's vantage point for everything that He, in His providence, intends to do. He does. And it's as good as done. So, Lord willing, after being back, coming back, we'll go back and start looking at the vision. We wanted to focus on Daniel tonight. Look at the vision. Begin to digest the details around Daniel's second vision. Let's stand.